don't think there's going to be an agreement, a ceasefire agreement, a formalized agreement, especially one that can pass muster in the United States Senate or become a Security Council resolution. Of course, that's the goal, that's the objective, but the United States is agreement incapable. Even if we come up with an understanding, the United States has deadlines. For instance, things have to happen at this point, and between now and then, Donald Trump will change his mind and seek to renegotiate, because Donald Trump is not in the, he's not interested in an agreement or a treaty. He is interested in the deal, and the deal is a completely different thing. A deal is, a one-way street. A deal is what's good for Donald Trump. A deal is something that can be broken at any time because it becomes a bad deal, and then you have to replace it with a good deal. He can seem to have a deal, but then he finds out after talking to people that it's really a bad deal, so he reneges on it. It has to be very frustrating to be negotiating with the United States at this point in time, because we can't be consistent in anything. The Iranians have been very consistent from the get-go on what their demands are, what the requirements are. And Iran does get to dictate because, after all, they didn't lose the war. We did. So that's where we're at. What's going to happen? Hard to say. I don't see an outbreak of full-scale conflict. The United States can't and survive economically. Already we're in dire straits. Iran will collect its tolls. I know Scott Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury, just sent out a warning to both Oman and Iran that this will not be tolerated. But I don't think Oman and Iran really care what Scott Bessent thinks or the United States Treasury thinks. The bottom line is Iran has a death grip on the transit of oil through the Strait of Hormuz, and nothing the United States says, does, wishes, desires is going to change that. The only thing that will change that is the United States adhering to, an agreement which it's incapable of entering into. So I think there's going to be an agreement in principle on certain things, whether it's the lifting of the blockade, whether it's the removal of U.S. forces, backing off, something will happen. But, at the end of the day, Iran's not going to give the United States what it wants on nuclear. That's just the reality of it. And Iran's not going to stop charging an environmental tax in the Strait of Hormuz. That's just the reality of it. And Donald Trump at this point in time has said these are, deal breakers. I think that's where we're at right now. We're just seeing the living proof of the fact that the Trump administration, the United States as a whole, is literally agreement incapable. And I don't think there's going to be a formal peace treaty. Now, I'd love to be proven wrong on this. I'd love nothing more than, tomorrow they've signed it and it's great. It goes to the Senate, they approve it, becomes a treaty, goes to the Security Council, and it's wonderful. I just don't see that happening because I don't think Donald Trump's capable of allowing that to happen. Sustained fight against Russia. And we're not in a position to support others because we're out of ammunition. We're literally out of ammunition. We got nothing left. So we've taken America off the board in terms of relevance. We can't even threaten anything. We can't even get our act together on troops in Poland. 4,200 aren't rotating in, but 5,000 are going in, but Congress hasn't approved, so 5,000 aren't. We don't have anything. We're literally a bunch of hot air coming out of the mouths of the most irrelevant people in the planet. Unfortunately, there are some relevant people that are doing relevant things. The British are very relevant. The British have been running a very successful campaign, which sought to divert the focus of effort away from the battlefield reality where, contrary to popular belief in the West, Russia is dominating across the battlefield. Things are not going well for the Ukrainians and haven't been for some time now. But the British have been playing a different game, a mental warfare game, designed to collapse Russia from within. Anybody who thinks that that's not possible, take a look at the collapse of the Soviet Union. You'll understand how mental warfare played a role in getting Russians to stop believing in themselves, Russians to start looking to the West as a dominant society, to lose faith in your leadership, to lose faith in everything, to abandon, what you're supposed to be, who you are. That's what happened in the decade of 1990s. Vladimir Putin did a reversal and built Russia up to where it is today, where they're proud of themselves with just reason, and all this stuff. We're trying to break that down again. That's what mental war is. And one of the things we're doing is exploiting the fact that Vladimir Putin doesn't want to escalate. That Vladimir Putin wants to keep this war confined to Ukraine and deal with the limited objectives of making sure Ukraine doesn't join NATO and doesn't retain Banderist Nazi ideologies, things of that nature, doesn't pose a threat to Russia. So the West has been testing him all along. Every time a red line is drawn, F-16s, red line, Third World War, F-16s come in, Russia just responds by killing the F-16s. HIMARS, attack them. shooting them down, nullify them. How many times? When was the last time you heard about ATACMS doing anything worthwhile in Ukraine? You don't. It's the same thing. Every escalation is managed by Russia. Operation Spiderweb, drones coming in, hitting bombers. That should have triggered a massive response. Russia just blew it off because they said it doesn't change the fundamental direction we're heading. We're doing okay. But the British have been focusing on asymmetric warfare, hybrid warfare, using drones. Everybody talks about Ukrainian drone operations. At the tactical level, the Ukrainians, I think a lot of the innovation is theirs. But when you get up to the strategic level, this is 100% a British-driven operation assisted by the CIA in Germany. Firepoint, a Ukrainian drone production company, is, look at the CEO. She's some girl with no education who's just a bimbo who was given the job to serve as a way to steal money to enrich Zelensky. But the British took it over and made it something real. The FP5 Flamingo is a British-made weapon. A British-made weapon that's fired against the Russian strategic depth, claiming to be Ukrainian. Before this war started, the Russians made a point to Joe Biden: we will not tolerate NATO missiles based in Ukraine that can hit Russia's strategic depth. Now you have NATO missiles based in Ukraine that hit Russia's strategic depth, a red line that was crossed. But the Russians went, we can ride this thing out. We can do this. The same thing with the FP1s, this wooden, drone that flies in and hits oil rigs and all that. The Russians are blowing it off, saying it's not a big deal. But there's a continuing echo chamber going out there, shouting out about how weak Putin is, how impotent Russia is, how this, that, and the other thing. And it's starting to resonate within certain segments of Russian society. And you start to get defeatism. You got people start doubting Vladimir Putin. Now, it hasn't reached critical mass. It's a long way from doing that. But it's there. This latest attack against Starobelsk Teachers College is the straw that broke the camel's back. I don't know if Ukraine and Great Britain intended it to be this way. I don't even know if they hit us, if they knew up front they were hitting a teacher's college. I actually think that AI assisted in the designation of this target, just like we did with Manab, clearly a school for children, but we bombed it thinking it was the headquarters of a missile brigade. Here they thought, because they saw photographs of students from another college, not this one, wearing military uniform, that this was a military facility. It's not. Those students were students who were participating in a game. They're non-combatants, not affiliated with the military, everything. That's the reality of it. But the AI doesn't see that because AI is not intelligent. AI just does what the people programmed to do. They saw a photograph and said, this school is a military target. And then the attack was sent in. FP1 drones, 4 of them, each one outfitted with air-to-ground rockets. That's the new variation, which means that somebody has to see it, because you don't fire air-to-ground rockets in the blind. This isn't a situation where you program in a GPS coordinate and the FP1 flies out there and flies in and dives in where it tells the dove. There's another drone above this. There's Starlink connectivity, we know, because they got the antennas, and it's being broadcast back to a command center. And that command center is seeing the target. So these drones come in and they cycle off their air-to-ground rockets. The eyewitnesses on the ground say, we heard rocket fire. We could see the rockets come in. We can hear the rockets come in. FP1 is a propeller-driven thing. It's not a rocket. So rockets being fired. Cycle back, fire again. Cycle back, fire again. 4 times. Then they dive in at the end because they carry 200-kilogram bombs. Dive in, boom, 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 collapse the building, kill 21 students. This resonated in Russia unlike anything. I mean, even in Kursk, when in August of 2024, when the British and American-led Nazis, literal Nazis, I mean, when I say Nazi, I mean swastika-wearing Nazis, went into Kursk, and the Russians couldn't evacuate the elderly from the border villages quick enough. And so hundreds of them, 600 or so, were captured. They were all murdered, butchered, raped. These Nazis were raping 80-year-old women, filming it. And then they go off and they get killed, and the Russians get the bodies, they get the cameras, and they have it. This is not speculation. This is statements of fact, and that didn't trigger this Russian reaction. The Russians still went, we'll just kill them, kill 60 to 80,000 of them, recapture the territory, and keep moving. We're not going to escalate. This attack is different. It hit Russia at the wrong time, and it basically has created an outrage that cannot be ignored by the Russian government. So what the Russian government did, first of all, is respond with a massive strike designed to take out the units responsible. Remember when I said that Starlink was involved? problem with Starlink involved is that that signal that's going back to have some guy watch this gets intercepted. And the Russians knew where it was. It was probably being run out of, there's a facility south of Kiev where the Ereshnik hit, White Church, it was called, ballistic. Hit these above ground garages. But we know that those were aircraft maintenance disguised compartment built during Soviet times, expanded by the Ukrainians, where the FP-1 drone unit was that was directing this fight. The Ereshnik took it off the map. It's gone, finished. They struck other facilities in and around Kiev. It's funny how people are like, they struck a museum. They struck a museum. They struck a shopping center. They struck civilian targets. Except, gosh, it's the Ukrainians that sit there and make the videos that say, the FP-1 drone, a great weapon. We're hitting the Russian oil thing, but we don't produce it in a factory, because if we produce it in a factory, the Russians would hit the factory and destroy it. So today we're in a school gymnasium. Today we're in the basement of a museum. Today they sort of openly admit it. Every place the Russian hit were FP-1 drone production facilities related to the attack on this school, command and control facilities, etc. That's what that attack was. That's all it was. Everybody thought that was going to be the big attack that does it. No. Then the Russians came out and said, because, again, Putin doesn't do anything in, knee-jerk. Standard response, and then he sits there and he waits, he deliberates, and they come out and they say, that's it, we're done. No more negotiations. Negotiations are finished. So anybody call us and everybody else in Europe going, well, we're going to try and figure out who's going to represent us in the negotiations with the Russians. There is no more negotiations. This will be unconditional surrender. That's it. Ukraine will accept Russia's terms as dictated by Russia without modifications, or Ukraine will die. That's where we're at. Now, they send out, in accordance with international law, they have to give adequate warning of any attack that may, cause casualties among the civilian population. And so that's what Russia did. They did it in writing. They've done it with phone calls. And everybody's sitting there going, well, why didn't they have attacked yet? Well, because the Russians are smarter than you and me. I myself said I thought that Kiev would be erased. They're not going to erase Kiev. Why? Because the Russians are smarter than you and me. A member of the State Duma, part of the Defense Committee, gave an interesting interview yesterday where he said, because I'm like, take out the Rada, take out the parliament, make it a visually pleasing thing. I said, the parliament's empty. And you want me to put an Ereshnik on the parliament? An Ereshnik costs $50 million. You want to put a $50 million weapon on an empty building that doesn't accomplish anything. No, when you use the Ereshnik, people have to die. Important people have to die. You have to collapse structures that are underground. That's what the Ereshnik does. So when they fire the Ereshnik, it's at a target that is designed to be collapsed and kill the people inside. That means you have to collect the intelligence where that target is. So they're not going to strike until they get the intelligence. The other thing they said is that this is going to take place over time. So it doesn't have to happen all at once. Fact is, if you go back in the intelligence business, sort of what I used to do in the when I was a weapons inspector, called shake the tree. But basically, you go in and you do something to provoke. And then in this case, I move in on a Special Republican Guard facility adjacent to a presidential palace because I believe the Special Republican Guard is hiding weapons of mass destruction documents. I can't prove it, though. So I go in there and I jolt them. Then I see what happens. Do cars go out the back? Where do the cars go? This worked like a champ. One place we hit, and sure enough, the cars went out. We tracked it to a place downtown Baghdad, had the YouTube image take a picture of it. I went there, and it was an evacuation point for documents related to the work that the Iraqis didn't want us to know about. Shake the tree, make them act, go, and you pounce on them. But in this case, it's not going to be inspections that pounce. It's going to be Ereshnik. It's going to be, Iskander. It's going to be precision munitions. They're going to hit the important things. Decision-making centers, and command and control and defense industry production, because the Ukrainians are not going to put it all in the factory. The factories are going to disappear. They're going to break it up and hide it around the country as they are wont to do, and Russians will detect it and kill it. This is a long-term strategy of absolutely degrading Ukraine's ability to stay in this fight, and that's what we're going to see going forward. I don't think we're going to see the massive strike that everybody's expecting. I was expecting it, but I don't think we're going to see that because I've been listening. That's the sign of a good analyst, by the way. You shut up sometimes. We're on a talk show, so I'm talking. But when we're done, I shut up and I listen. I listen to what the Russians say. I read what the Russians write, and I absorb it. And in absorbing what the Russians have been saying, I don't think there's going to be a massive decapitation strike. I think there's going to be a program of precision strikes over time that destroy Ukraine's ability to continue this fight. And that there's nothing the West can do about it. The other thing is the Russians are prepared to strike Europe, and the decision has already been made. Latvia is on notice. If they allow, next week, there's the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. And that's where I'm headed to speak. But the day after I speak, Vladimir Putin speaks. The Ukrainians want to put drones into the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. They're not going to. If they fly through the Baltic corridor, then the Baltic nations will be destroyed, eliminated. That's just a statement of fact. And if Europe wants to do anything about it, then Russia will hit them as well. This is where Russia's at right now. They're just tired of playing games. They're tired of dealing with stupid people. And they're just at the point right now where if you continue to attack Russia in a way that threatens it existentially, Russia will respond accordingly. Ukraine, unfortunately, is going to find out this lesson. It's the end of Ukraine. Ukraine will cease to exist in the state that it is. There will be unconditional surrender. Russia will control the government. The United States no longer has a vote. You remember how Donald Trump was talking about how we're going to have, security guarantees. We're going to have, we're going to control this and that and the other thing. The U.S. doesn't have a vote. We're done. We actually backed out. We're finished. And they will never be invited back in. That's the reality. Europe's never been invited in, although they think they want to be invited in. Nobody will be invited in. This is between Russia and Ukraine.
Well, if you could react to this, Scott, I'm seeing a parallel here. We had the Trump administration since February 28th, since the beginning of the strikes in Iran, claim that everything was destroyed. And he said this for weeks and weeks and weeks. Iran's military capabilities, everything, missiles, drones, Air Force, Navy, all of it gone. And when you were talking about the way that Russia is being portrayed now across a wide range of the political spectrum in the West and in the United States, it's Russia is on the back foot. Russia, they even tried to claim that the retaliation is a way to try to convince people everywhere that Russia is not weak. But last time I checked, these wars, the United States, NATO, they instigated these wars, and yet they're the ones who have not won them at all. Like, they haven't won these wars. So it's an interesting thing when the United States, NATO, Europe, I guess the collective West as it is, claim that others are weak, that they're targeting, and yet they are the ones that are stuck and unable to dictate any outcomes in it. I find that very curious. What's your reaction to it?
Well, let's look at the statement of fact. Remember that you don't have to put that chart up, but the chart that you had there before. And they talked about a framework agreement. That's a framework agreement between the Trump administration and American defense contractors, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and others, that they're going to ramp up production. There's no money been attached to that, so therefore it's purely theoretical. Nothing's happening. That's the state of U.S. defense industry, totally incapable of meeting the demands of modern war. As we saw, a 37-day campaign against Iran has literally drained the arsenal of the West. An ongoing conflict with Ukraine has done the same with Europe and what's ever left of the United States arsenal. Zero. Russia, on the other hand, has been building up its defense industry. It's just chugging along like you wouldn't believe. And Russia's not just building things and using things. That's how we operate in the West, by the way. That's one of the reasons why we don't have massive stockpiles, because you can't convince Congress of the need to overproduce and have 5,000 weapons sitting in a warehouse that may never get used. And if they never get used, then they get outdated, and that means we just spend a lot of money on weapons because our weapons are very expensive. So we can't overproduce them. We have to produce just the number we need to meet certain benchmarks of training and operational storage. But our operations are always based on short wars because we're going to intimidate the enemy into surrendering. We don't have any plan for long wars because we can't produce enough weapons to support a long war. Look at this 37-day war. We couldn't do it. Russia, on the other hand, operates only on the concept of long wars. So their defense industry is not just producing weapons for this war, but remember, their military went from 900,000 then was expanded to 1.2 million, and now is currently expanded, I think, to over 2 million. That's a lot of people. Where are they getting their weapons? From Russian defense industry. And it's not just guns and uniforms and ammunition. It's the weapons of war, tanks. I love when I hear stupid people like Jeff Fisher, some retired colonel idiot, who's like, the Russians don't have anything. The Russians have everything, Jeff. Everything you don't have, everything the West doesn't have. They've been producing tanks, armored personnel carriers, artillery pieces on a regular basis, and they don't go to the front lines exclusively. They go out to equip the new units that have been created, like the 70,000 strong new Army Corps in the St. Petersburg military district that has armor, artillery, everything. And you don't just build armor, artillery, you have the ammunition that they need to fight a sustained war. So they build up the ammunition stocks as well. This is what Russia is doing. Russia will never run out of ammunition. Look at Oreshnik. Russia's fired 3 of them. The first 2 were experimental models. I don't know what this one was, probably a serial production one. They went into serial production in August. Let's just call August a wash, meaning we plan on going to serial production, but we haven't quite produced it yet. So September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, 9 months. Minimum production, 5 Oreshniks. 9 times 5, 45. 45 minus 1, 44. They have 44 Oreshniks. But that's minimum production. Maximum production, based upon what I experienced when I worked at Vodkensk, they could probably produce, they were running out the, annual production for the SS-20s, 80 a year or so. But let's just call it, let's break it down. Let's call it half. The bottom line is there's 60 or so. The Russians probably have somewhere, around 50, 60, 70 Oreshniks. That's a lot.